Hey everybody, I'm doing a quick video on how bad stock strings really are on a bass guitar. Same applies to electric guitar. So this is my Indio bass. I'm loving it. These are the original strings though. I put about 20 hours into them while I was deciding if I wanted to keep the bass or return it. Decided I want to keep it. But the strings, I hear their true tone now. So what happens, so strings, every string stretches. There's a break-in period. And cheap strings, they actually will stretch longer. It can take them longer to really show their true nature. But they'll start showing it pretty quick. But they don't show the true extent to how bad the strings are for a while. Good alloys, good metal alloys, that have more strength to them, they won't stretch as much. Other thing about cheap metal can have impurities in it to make it more likely to break. But what we care about is tone, right? We could have strings that don't last as long, but if they sound as the best strings in the world, people are still going to use them. So manufacturers use, if they don't give a name brand for the strings on the website. So you look up a bass on a website for the manufacturer. So you go to the Fender website, you look at a Fender Player Series bass, and you look at like a Squier or Affinity bass. On Squier Affinity bass, it says strings 45 to 105. It doesn't give a brand name. It's made by Fender, so you're thinking, oh, it's got Fender strings. No, it's got cheaper strings that are too cheap for Fender. Fender doesn't want to put their name on it, okay? You look at like the Player Series, the Fender Player Series, it will say Fender 7250s. So it will actually name the strings that's on there. So if you look on the website, if it doesn't give a name brand, doesn't say the Dario, Fender, DR, doesn't give a brand name for the strings on the specs for the bass, it's going to be cheap strings. Okay? Manufacturers do this because if they sell 100,000 basses, they save 10 bucks on the strings cost, they save $1 million. But they need some kind of strings on it. They aren't going to cut the price down by 5 bucks and sell it to you with no strings on it. You need strings to try it out in the store, to test out the electronics. So cheap strings actually sound best when they're brand new after you first tune them up. But then they stretch and they sound worse. Good strings tend to sound better after they break in. Okay. So these, I got enough time in them. I have it tuned up. I set my action, but you can hear the true nature of these strings. So sorry, the kids are asleep. I just got back. Had to drive to the big city and back. But I'm excited to put my new strings on the bass that I just got. So I'm going to do a video before I pull the old ones off. So I'll come up, listen to your strings acoustically, okay? Not through your amp to really hear the quality of the string, right? There's the E, A, D, G, okay? And where you hear the worst part is, in the case of a bass, is on the E string. People talk about muddy E strings, okay? Which means it's just undesirable. We don't want muddy bass because it is actually hard to tell the difference between notes. And muddy is actually means there's other frequencies mixed in with that note, aside from the harmonics. So when you listen to a note, there's the fundamental tone plus multiple harmonics. Okay, they kind of layer together. And if you're just hearing the fundamental tone plus harmonics, and things kind of how they're mixed will adjust some depending on your pickup, your bass. But you don't want other notes thrown in there, just randomly thrown in notes, right? That I'm not aiming for. So this E string, when a tuner will say it's tuned to E, because that's the loudest frequency there. But it's just kind of this wonk thing. It's mud. It's like a pile of mud. It's like a mud pie. Okay? There's not much shape to it. Okay? And if you go ahead and take your guitar, your bass, hold it up to your ear, and you listen to them acoustically. And that muddiness will come through your amp. It won't sound, your notes coming through your amp won't sound as good as a good clean tone going through your amp. If you distort things, distortion it doesn't really muddy things. Like distortion really kind of will round things off. Might add harmonics on, but if you put a piece of mud through, okay, you can't decorate a piece of mud pie and have it become a chocolate cake. Okay, you got to start with chocolate cake and decorate it to have a slice of chocolate cake. So this E string, there's this warble to it. Okay. So what happens is, what we want all the vibrations to just be the string as a whole kind of swinging, doing these short vibrations. But what happens is those outer wraps can loosen up and you'll get vibrations that go up and down and in different ways. Because it's like the string windings are shifting and it's fighting against itself. And it shifts the frequency. And so you get shifted frequencies on top of fundamental, and you get a muddy mess. And it really sounds awful. And you try to listen to the difference between notes, and you hear it change as you go up frets, but it's not as defined. So people talk about note definition. You don't hear as big of a jump because things are overlapping. Okay? You're shifting things when you change those frets, but there's some overlap, and it's just this muddy, ugly mess. So what happens is, in the case of basses, the magic number seems to be about $800. If you spend $800 or more on a bass, it's going to come with good strings to start with. If you spend less, you're getting the cheap strings. Some brands, it might be more in the $500 range, where they start putting good strings on them, because they want the expensive basses in the store to sound better than the cheap ones. So they're going to put good strings on the $1,000 bass. They're going to put better strings on the $1,000 bass than the $200 bass. They want the $200 bass to sound good enough and feel good enough that someone with it in their budget is going to like it versus another cheap bass. But if I'm committed to, I want to buy a Fender or Squier, Fender wants me to like the way the Players Series or the American Original sound versus the Affinity. So they're going to put the better strings on the more expensive basses. Even though the Fender, it was $18 on Amazon. It's the same strings to put on the $1,000 Fenders. So plan on changing the strings. If you buy an expensive bass that does come with name brand strings, and it's a brand that you haven't tried before, give it a couple weeks. Play it with those strings on it, because you gotta let those strings break in to really kind of hear the true tone of those strings. Now, a lot of strings lose a bit of the harsh high end. You know, like if you you dropping coins on top of each other, there's that metallic clink they do. If your strings got a little bit of that tends to die off as you break strings in. So give them some time, try out a new set like that. If you don't like them, switch to a set that you like the sound of. Because different sets will sound different, right? Because pickups flavor to tone, and strings flavor to tone, and the combination of the two feed into amp, right? That gives you a tone, right? An overall tone. So being a new bass to you, it might be those pickups sound better with different strings than you're used to. But get those cheap strings off of there. Once you've played it enough to know you don't want to take it back to the store, get those cheap strings off, and then you can hear the true tone of that bass, like the best it can do, right? Then you can really hear what the pickup does. You can hear what the tone wood does. You can hear if the bridge is affecting the tone. Okay. So hope that's helpful. Have a good night.